Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for another Ask Us Anything. It is so good to be back. For it to be Friday. And of course we have some great guests with us today. But first, just want to say welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan Shelton. I work with Group Unlimited, the distributor of DiGiCo in the U.S. I'm based out of Nashville. I have Kyle McMahon with me, our producer, throwing the buttons, switching the cams. Hey, bud. And then we have Dan Page, our token British person from the UK. So
good evening, everyone.
And also product ambassador with
Thanks,
DiGiCo.
Ryan.
But yeah, hey, thanks, bud. Thanks for joining us today. Dan will be fielding questions in the back. You guys know the rules, how this works by now. This is an Ask Us Anything. We have special guests here, who I'll introduce in a second. But your job is to ask questions. So anything that pops up that you think either of these gentlemen would know, please type it in the comments. Dan and Kyle are going to be monitoring those and sharing those with us, and we'll make sure we get to ask them. And as long as it's appropriate, of course, you know how this works also. All right, so real quick, we're always going to give this disclaimer. We're doing this out of our homes, home internets. We're using Skype as a backbone into other things, and all that we're posting to Facebook. So if it all goes wrong, we are going to try to come back to the same feed. If that doesn't work, just go back to the DiGiCo page and you'll see start a new stream there. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our first two guests. The first I'm going to introduce is Justin Whisnant. Justin is the AVL Integration Director at Elevation Church and has been working there for 6 years. He is responsible for building their AVL systems for permanent and for non-permanent locations. He also mixes front house and monitors at their broadcast location on the weekends and for special events. He grew up going to music festivals and local shows, but didn't want to give up the production background, but always wanted to tour, whether that meant being the merch guy or pushing cases around. Joining us from, I believe, just outside of Charlotte is Justin. Justin, how you doing today?
Oh, doing great. How are you?
Doing very good. Thanks for making the time and joining us today.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. And then I'm going to introduce our next guest, Cory Edwards. Cory is a front house engineer, production manager, and production designer, secretly also an LD. So, oh wait, I wasn't supposed to say that one. Living in Nashville, Tennessee. Although he wears many hats in the industry, he always has a love and a passion for mixing. He started his career in the church at a very early age as a volunteer, and over time moved up into the role of director of live production at Central Church in Las Vegas. Next, he jumped into full-time touring, moved to Nashville, and has spent the last couple of years working with artists such as Jesus Culture, Lauren Daigle, Ren Collective, Elevation Worship, Hillsong Worship, and many more. Cory Edwards, thank you for joining us, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you, and thank you both for being here. So we are obviously doing a little bit of a house of worship focus today for the Ask Us Anything. Both of you have, despite being young, you have quite a bit of history already and experience in the church world, so thank you so much for that. Justin, let's start with you. Obviously, we read your bio, but you tell us, how you got started. What was it like? What was your journey like into where you are now?
Well, I didn't grow up I didn't go to school for production or anything related to AVL. And so I, just got involved at Elevation Church about, it's coming up on 11 years ago. And, was just a greeter at first, went through that, and then eventually got into eKids, and it was just really setting up a couple of speakers, had a little Allen and Heath, Z14 console that had 2 mics, playlist, that kind of stuff. And I was like, I want to know more about production. I want to be better, and want to learn something new because I just didn't go to college. And so I joined the tech team as an intern, again, probably about 6.5 years ago. And and so now I'm here. I just got around the right people is really what happened. People who wanted to invest, people who wanted to just, let us know things. So.
Awesome. So what does your role look like now? What are you in charge of, and what do you do there?
So the audio video lighting, specifically audio and video of that, but building systems for our non-permanent and permanent locations. So one of our campuses we just built is our Concord location. So I was in charge of, speccing out everything from the line arrays that we have, or audio console, or IO racks, stuff like that, any wireless systems. And then, I'm just making sure that everything is talking to each other, making sure that volunteers have something that is easy for them to use, but also, giving them, the best quality equipment that we can, because we think that our message is important, and we just want people to hear it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we're going to come back to your systems in a minute because I did want to dig a little more into, I know you guys, not exactly standardize is the right word, but you try to follow a formula to so you can move people around and resources around where needed. So we'll touch on that in a minute. Cory, hey, why don't you give us your brief how you got to where you are today and what that looked like, stuff that wasn't covered in the bio.
Yeah. I kind of grew up playing music. I played drums and guitar and volunteered in the kids ministry at church. And one day no one showed up to turn the sound system on. So I think I was 10. So I went back and hit all the buttons until sound came out of the speakers, and kind of fell in love with that, and kind of dove headfirst into that, and, kind of playing music and being a part of that. I loved being the mixer and engineer and being able to kind of put all the puzzle pieces together. So I grew up, all through middle school, high school, just learning. And I was the annoying little kid behind the guy in big church asking questions about every time he reached for a knob or did something. And ended up moving to Central Church and was eventually on staff there, and kind of felt like God was calling me to something else. And I ended up moving to Nashville and started touring, and I've kind of not looked back since. So I love getting to be a part of touring and traveling, but a lot of what I do is supporting church ministries that have great music. And so I kind of feel like I always have a connection back to the church. In some way, shape, or form. And I love getting to support that and share that gospel because, in the, like with Elevation, what they do at church is so important. And that, I would say, is like the most important thing for them. So getting to take that and what they're doing and amplify that for people who may not be able to go see a church service or go to a location is special to me. And, I've been honored to be a part of that, and love getting to do that with them.
Awesome. Well, great. So do you, when Elevation goes on the road and does some of their events, do you mix for them as well and for those events?
Yeah. So I am the production manager and front of house engineer. So I wear two hats with them, and, balancing that's a tricky thing. And, but I love getting to kind of stop my day before the show and walk out and mix and go into that world. And, audio and music is super important to them. So it's a lot of collaboration with the guys that create the music, and then being able to like be a part of that. And then I also am a part of a lot of the live recordings back at the church. So I've ended up playing a role in those two in the last 2 years, which has been great.
Oh, that's awesome. So, Cory, what are you filling your time with now? I mean, obviously, we were previously talking before we went live about festivals, that we would all normally be getting ready to sweat during this point in the year to whatever we're doing for that. But so right now, what are you filling your time with, and what are you doing?
So I've kind of like everyone, I've had every show and tour cancel for the foreseeable future, and figuring out what to do next. And so I've kind of pivoted, and I've started mixing in the studio and building a studio out here in my home. And, and so that's been great. I get to help churches with, everyone switching to live broadcasts for their weekend or pre-recorded broadcasts. So I'm mixing a lot for that. And then I've really enjoyed getting to like focus back in on audio. I think with what I do in my normal job is a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, a lot of Excel sheets. So it's kind of been a fun couple months to really focus back in on mixing and being creative and learning. And so that's kind of what I've been doing since January.
No, very cool. Very cool. Justin, real quick. So what does your week to week look like now? Because obviously you guys are still producing services, you're still streaming those and doing that. But what does it look like? Because I have to imagine over the last couple of months, a lot of the events that were happening there weekly are gone, for lack of a better word. But what does it look like for you now?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, as many people have had to do, everybody's pivoting. So most churches have had to pivot and figure out how to get, some churches weren't doing live streams. Luckily, we were in a position where we were already streaming, every weekend, and online was our biggest audience. So for us, it was just figuring out how to make online the best. We weren't really focusing on what was happening in the room. We were more focusing on, we originally were doing that. We were focusing on our guests that are at all of our locations. And now it's like, well, now all of our guests need to tune in online. So we need to make that great. So my week to week, it varies. I will help, our technical director for the church, which is Zach Kimry. He's the one that's over, broadcasts for our church. So making sure that online happens, that everything technical in that building happens. So it's just really supporting him. And making sure that if we needed a spot to be filled, if it's cable gripping or anything like that, that's what my week to week looks like now, is support for that. And then most churches don't have this time. They only have like 5 days to work on their gear. So we're working on a bunch of our systems, trying to make them better, make them more standardized. As you said, we're not, it's not a standard yet, but we're, trying to fix things that, may fall to the wayside week to week because it's not important, because we're still able to make church happen.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually a really good point. So you're using the downtime to just take care of those ever-nagging things that need to be done, the cables that need to be organized and repaired and stuff like that. It's really smart. Yeah. Cool. So Dustin has a great question, but we're actually not going to go there first. Our top fan, according to the Facebook Live page. Thank you, Dustin, for all your comments. And it's good to see you with us again, buddy. So Justin, would you kind of give us an overview of how many campuses Elevation has, what kind of basic equipment? You don't have to tell us, how many SM58s you have in every room, but if you can just kind of give us an overview of what your campus looks like, all the multiple campuses and just kind of the events that are normally done there.
Yeah, so we have campuses that span all the way from, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and then we have one in Toronto, Canada. And so most of them look pretty much the same. Consoles may change here or there just because of, budget or whatever. But for the most part, we have 19 locations that are not our broadcast. So we can, go back to the standardized thing. We're trying to make it to where, we have the same audio consoles so we can have the same show file, so that anybody that mixes at, say, our Gastonia location can mix at our Matthews location, which both of those are here in the Charlotte area. And so we're just trying to make those a little bit better. So we use Shure products for microphone systems and IEMs. We use, we're getting to DiGiCo. Again, the budget. So when you're trying to deal with, 20 locations or 19 locations, that, need to be upgraded, it's hard to upgrade all at once. Yeah. So we use that stuff. We, for the most part, we're using like stage boxes, like W2 stage boxes, and a typical like double wide IO rack is what we use for storing all of our gear for like a non-permanent location. So non-permanent location really only has 2 racks sitting side stage. We have the IO rack that has the amps in it as well. And then we have a distro that is for all of our power. So we have a generator on site because we go into schools, we go into gymnasiums, we go into all kinds of things. So, most of them don't have enough power for us to run all of our gear off of. And so the only other piece of gear that we have that makes church happen is our fly pack, which is just video control for us. Okay. So.
Very cool. Thanks for the rundown on that. So we can actually jump to Dustin's question now, because I think it'll make a little more sense. Dustin Muncie asks, when you have a dozen or more SD9s around campus, what will be the catalyst of updating your standard option to an SD12, et cetera, stuff like that?
It's difficult. Well, we've got to get to where we have SD9s at every location. That would be our goal. And so, we start out like other churches, we get a cheaper console, So, we have a couple of X32s in the church. We have some old M7 CLs still in the church. And so it's just, upgrading those campuses because we believe, again, like I said, we believe in the message. So we want, we want to make sure that we have gear that is operating properly. So for us, SD9 has everything that we need. It's, we use the D racks instead of D2 racks. Which we have a couple of D2 or two campuses that have D2 racks. But, before we started this, I was going over like how many inputs are we actually using, and, physical, XLR connections, we're using about 40 to 48 per campus. And then we also use the MADI lines off the back of the SD9 because we're sending video or audio from video control and then sending audio back to video control. So
awesome. All right, cool. Let's see here. Cory, tell us about your first digital console. Experience. What was that all about? What was the first console for you?
So I learned on an old analog Allen and Heath desk, and it was awesome, and we upgraded, and we got, I think, one of the very early D1 lives, which is just old school and DiGiCo days, and I learned on that.
Hey, hold on 1 second, Kyle. Can you throw up Dan's picture, Dan's feed? Did you just hear what he said, Dan?
I was busy actually answering questions, but did he mention D1?
He mentioned D1, and then he said old school. So I just want you to know that I know. Your and I console.
That makes me old. Thanks.
I just wanted to stop and make sure to point that out. Go ahead, Cory. So you got one of the early D1s.
Yeah, and we went through all the bug testing, and so I really built what I do on consoles around that desk. And how I set consoles up, and the idea of being able to put faders anywhere, and having channel strips and all of presets was such a it was ingrained in my head from so early on, but that has led now to the SD range, and I think I've mixed on DiGiCo consoles since then, so I feel like an early adapter to the DiGiCo world.
Yeah, you are just about as early as it gets. Only a few more years before that, actually. Cool. Well, let's actually jump into the console side of things. So obviously, you're both focused more in what we would call the church market or the house of worship market. But let's actually talk about the structure of your console. So how do you guys set this up? Cory, I know you have quite an extensive structure, so I think we'll just start with you and let you go off there. But would you kind of walk through kind of your basic workflow, how you set things up, just kind of your overall design if you were walking into a show or to an event?
So I'm very group heavy. I love mixing into groups and groups mixing into other groups, and that going to my master bus. For me, when you get into high channel counts, it's a really easy way to manage all that stuff from one. I've got it to where within 3 banks of faders, I kind of have my whole console. And then from there, I'm able to treat groups of instruments as single things, so like, for example, we have two different stereo guitar players. So I'm able to send those to a group and process that there. And then that goes to an electric group, which has usually some light compression on it. And then that will go to a band group, which most of the time I don't do much on like a band and vocal group, but I have the ability to, if something were to arise. And then that'll go to my master bus. So things go through multiple steps before they hit the master bus. But for me, it's a really easy way to manage all of that stuff. And as far as like balance, I can sit on that group page and balance out the band just from one place.
Yeah. So how do you decide if you're going to go make a change to an instrument or a group or the master or one of the other groups in between?
Yeah. So I'll just keep guitars. I'll use it as an example. So I kind of do my panning and and I do the panning with the faders, not necessarily so they get panned hard left and right. So I do the imaging on the inputs, and I do my high pass filter on the inputs. But then I use the group to make any tone changes that I need to make. And then in the guitar group, what I'll use that for is whenever there's a solo or lead line, I'm pushing the electric one group into the electric group, and it's hitting the compression harder. So it's allowing me to kind of make balances in different spots depending on how I need to do that and what I want to do. And then like with drums, the drums kit goes to 2 or 3 different groups that are doing different things. And so for me, the input channel stays a little bit more simple, but I'm doing big changes on the group, treating it as a whole versus a single input.
Cool.
So it helps me, almost keep more organized so that I know, there's too much low mid, I go to the group for that, or I've high passed it too much, I can go to the input channel. But a lot of times those input channels are down a couple layers on my console because I can focus on the one bank of groups with all the different pieces.
That's great. Justin, do you have a similar approach? I imagine you have to try to simplify some of this because you have you're not the only one touching the console every single week and for every single event. But what's your approach to setting up a console?
So most of our consoles, with the exception of Valentine. So Valentine is our broadcast location. So if I reference that, that's what that's talking about. So with the exception of Valentine, most of it is we have newer sound engineers that may not know too much about, parallel compression. So we're like in the middle of like teaching some of that stuff and, just getting people on board, because some of it is just like people have an interest in it. And we're like, oh, like you've been around the church for long enough, like let's, put you through some virtual sound checks and like see what you do. But a lot of our campuses in the mornings, they only have, maybe 2 hours to get ready before run through. So they're setting up gear and doing all this. So a lot of what we do is just control groups. So, we'll do like drums, bass, guitars, keys, loops, band, like there'll be like a band one as well. And then vocals, background vocals. And then we have what we call uplink, but that's just what's coming from Valentine. So it's our channels that are coming via Maddie. And so we do use groups for some of that, just for compression, but it's mostly, we might have like, drums clean, and then snare parallel, tom parallel, and then so we can line that stuff up, because we're dealing with video at those campuses too. So we don't want the video and audio to be too out of sync. So with some of that stuff, because it might be a camera shot in the back of the room, we will, we'll add basically a vocal group and a band group. And so all of my other instruments go to the band that's not going to drums. And then, so basically all of my groups are just going right into the master. So everything's lined up, leaving the console. But yeah, we don't use too many groups. I wish we could, but it's a lot to teach people. And you're right, there's so many people that, we might have this engineer at this campus this weekend, and then the next weekend they're, in Raleigh or wherever. So we do have to simplify it a lot for those.
Well, good. Well, that actually takes us back to another question that Dustin asked earlier. I'm trying to find this one. How much do you push to make all campus console files match? How much freedom to engineers or do they have versus what is locked in? What's your approach to that?
Yeah, so we're actually, because of all this downtime, we're able to work on some show files and actually standardize them across all campuses. So the good thing about having, layer 1, 2, and 3 is we're able to use layer 1 for every bank is, or for all 4 banks is the same on every console. Layer 2, we give the option to our sound engineers. So if that workflow doesn't work for them, then they can use layer 2 to like kind of build their system. So, because some people like start with drums at the, bank 4, and some people like start with drums at the top. So it's just a matter of like what your workflow is. So bank or layer 2 is for them, and then layer 3 is just one through however many inputs we have, and then all of our auxes and all of our groups and matrices and all that. So all of that stuff is on the so that's just how we set it up. Is just, layer 1 is a standard, layer 3 is a standard of every single channel that we have on the desk, and then layer 2 is for anybody to come in and just make it theirs. Makes sense. Cool. Cory, I think you already gave us your kind of your layout and your go-to, so we'll come back to you for another one real quick. Sam Rogerson looks like he was asking, do you ever send audio and video feeds between different campuses? And if so, how do you achieve this? Justin, you want to? How do you send audio? No, how do you send audio between campuses, audio and video, and how do you do that? So we're actually using Living as One, is a company that we're using. Gives us a lot of flexibility. We can send, I think you can technically send up to 16 channels now, but we are only using 8. So, from Valentine, we have, whether it be groups or however we're sending it out, we have it set up to where, the first 2 channels are left, right, first 2 channels are left, right, are just keys, loops, different things that a campus may or may not have. And then we have click and MD. So that's how we keep all of our campuses in line with each other, is they're actually getting the click and the MD from our broadcast location is coming down that channel. The 4th channel is just a vocal channel, so that we can send the vocals clean to them, so they don't have to fight with, at Valentine, the music is a lot louder coming to them than the vocal. Well, it's separated for them. We also use time code for lighting consoles, and another software we're using is Resolume for visuals. And then we do AR mics, and then our pastor or whoever is speaking on the weekend during the sermon is on the 8th channel of Living as One. Very cool. And then, as you said before, you're just taking those as inputs into the other campuses that are receiving those, and they can do what they need to there with them. Yes, that's correct. We're actually using, we use that. So all of those channels come via MADI to the desk. Cool. So we have a device in our video control that is sending MADI to all of our SD9s. Very cool. All right, real quick, jumping back to kind of a console type thing. Hey, Cory, so obviously when you're doing your live events, just if you can remember back when you did live events, so you had obviously one of the, to me at least, one of the hallmarks of Christian worship music and contemporary Christian worship music is having lots of vocals on stage. And this doesn't always mean a choir. Sometimes there's a choir there, but usually there's not just one lead singer and then like a guitar, mic in front of the guitar player who sometimes sings when he feels like it, when he's not distracted by his pedal board, etc. I mean, you're mixing with a lot of people there on the front of the stage. Cory, will you walk us through what that's like, having multiple lead vocals? I mean, I know some of the events you've done, you've had up to like 6 different lead vocals. What's your workflow like that? Because I know this is kind of a common thing within church. So I assume that there's a lot of people who will probably be able to take some takeaways from how you handle this. Yeah. Well, I just, recently started really getting into snapshots, and I've loved, like, through my career, just mixing in one snapshot and just, hands on the console. But and historically I've mixed artists that have had at least single lead vocal, maybe 2. So, I've never been in a situation where I had to kind of think through this process of, okay, I've got 4, 5, 6, I think our last live recording we just did, the Graves into Gardens album, we had 10 vocalists, I think, that all led throughout the night. And so when I started Mix for Elevation, I was like, okay, how do I, when they start flowing with the music or worship, or, I want them to do what they need to do. How do I manage this? Because, I have quite an extensive set of effects that I use for lead vocals, and I have a different set of effects for background vocals. And I really like to do some really subtle, like parallel compression on lead vocals, but obviously don't want that on background vocals. So one of the things that I kind of came up with is using macros to reroute
vocal channels to groups, and then I send all of the effects off of that group. So at the push of a button, I can change vocal 1 to either go to my lead vocal and parallel group or to the background vocal group really quickly. And so, in the combination with snapshots, I also have all of these macro buttons that are on the surface all the time because, leaders will start a song and then someone else will, pick up that second half of the song. So, I want to be able to switch that quickly. And then at the end of the song, the third vocalist may start leading a different song, and to be able to hit that. And so it really came out of necessity of like, okay, I don't want to send all of the vocals to all of the effects and delays and doublers and whatever else I have going on. I just want whoever's leading. And so, that kind of started that whole process. And then in that, I was like, okay, I have, 4 fingers that I have on the vocals, and I don't want to be pushing faders up and down and miss something really important. So I actually use the groups then to level out the 2 sets of vocals. So, when they're going to the lead vocal group, that group's at unity. When they get sent to the background vocal group, that may be -5, -6. So that all my input faders kind of stay where they need to, and I know where my home base is. I keep all those at unity. So if I get into trouble, I can bring those all back to unity and know I'm kind of in a good place. And then it's just from there routing, and that sends, that changes the effects and who's going to what effects. So it really is a quick way, to do that. And then when I'm building my snapshots, I use those macros to assign people to the different groups, store that in the snapshot. So that as we're going through the tour, the recording, or whatever we're doing, I'm not thinking about that until something changes or we go off script a little bit. So that's a huge, huge part of how I kind of manage all of the different leaders and, where they go and how they get sent to things.
Honestly, that's a great approach. Obviously, you should take my word for it. But with a typical like scripted show where you have snapshots or scenes or cues you're running through, if you have a band or an artist or a group that sticks with the script, that snapshots work great. But when you have something that can be very spontaneous, like a worship service, you need to be able to be in this song, but hey, this person's leading, whereas they didn't do that during rehearsal. Or Justin, kind of to your point earlier, that maybe they had 2 hours to set up the entire portable system, and who had a chance to even capture snapshots, during that time as well. So, yeah, and I. At first this has all been development, but I started like, okay, I have a macro to bring up my aux sends, and I'm going to switch all of the effects really quick. And, and it just gets, I didn't want to miss other things that were just as important as the vocal and getting that right. And so, that's been a development, and it turns into more and more every time we do a show or a tour or whatever. And that macro sequence gets more complicated. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we've actually had a lot of great questions come in, so let's take a break and jump to a lot of these. David Bullard asks, Justin, what would you say for a church with wireless IEMs deciding on doing personal mixing versus a monitor console? Pros and cons to switching to a separate console for monitors. Now, Justin, you actually do switch between like front of house and monitor mixing, right?
Correct. Yeah.
At Elevation. So you can obviously speak to this. You've been the monitor console guy. You guys at the Ballantyne campus, the main one, you do have a monitor console there, right?
That's correct. So our Ballantyne location is actually the only campus that has a monitor console. So at all of our 19 other locations, they are mixing mixing front of house, but they're also focusing on monitor mixes for and all of our campuses use IEMs. We might have some monitors or wedges on stage for like the campus pastor at that campus, but for the most part, all of our worship leaders, background vocalists, band has IEMs, and so the struggle, the tension is that 2.5 hour time window that they got to get ready for rehearsal, and they're having to tweak ears for a band because sometimes band members might change campuses and they want their mix a different way, or somebody else is mixing a little bit differently. So, so we going to DiGiCo, it's just, you could do it on an iPad, but it would be one dedicated iPad at the stage. But then you're giving all of this control to the band or the worship leader, and most of them don't know how to mix. They don't know what they're touching, so they could touch gain and mess you up in the middle of an experience. And so then you're fighting feedback because they, instead of just pushing the fader up, they gained it up on you, or they added compression or something like that. So so for us, it's like, we just say the front of house engineer is responsible for both. And I kind of have walked some of our sound engineers through, it's like, if you're here at this campus, do the tweaks you need to do, make sure the band gives you what you need to make it sound great. But there comes a point where you kind of have to say, I can't do any more tweaks. I have to focus on what's happening in the room. And so we actually have, at our campuses, we have 2 MD mics, one on each side of the stage. And so sometimes it's at a guitarist, sometimes it's at the keys player, or maybe a bassist, or it's next to the drums. And so they're actually in communication during the experience. And the good thing is, going back to not talk about video, but our MD mics are actually going to our video control. So it's going through comms. So somebody at front of house can, relay some information to the sound engineer instead of them having to have like one ear in and then, trying to mix the house on the right side. So it's, it definitely is a struggle and a challenge, but we've learned some things to do, and, it's just teaching them the right way to mix, and, saying like, hey, if it sounds good in the house, it should sound good in their ears. Because our rooms, we go in and tune them and, try and make them the best that we can, so that, you're not, trying to pull a bunch out of an instrument that is not there in the room.
Yeah, for sure. So. Cool. Well, slightly off topic, but definitely connected. Our top fan, Dustin Muncie, says, is the pastor's vocal sent pre or post processing from Valentine? I think that's probably a great question, and both Justin and Cory can probably chime in on that, because I imagine, Cory, in your day, you've taken a lot of feeds from video as well, whether it's been recorded or live. So, Justin, what's your setup like? And then Cory, then chime in with what you think there as well.
So for right now, we kind of just we do double up our channel for our pastor. So there is processing that's happening in the room, and then there's very minimal, like, obviously we'll put a high pass filter on it and cut out some of the stuff that we know we just need to cut out. But for the most part, it's being sent clean. There's slight compression on it, just because he likes to dig in sometimes and basically wrap his hand around the capsule, which we know what that can do. And so there is some of that to handle that going to other campuses. But for the most part, it's on the campuses to make it sound good for their room, because we don't want to take a bunch of stuff out that they need for their specific room, because obviously we know all rooms are different, and we don't have stuff happening outside. So it is sent. The only thing that is different is we're actually sending the signal to them is post fade. So so it is controlled from Valentine. So really, the sound engineer, once we get into experience, they shouldn't need to touch the fader that much unless they're just not using compression or something on their end. Okay.
Very cool. So, Cory, having been a person to receive video feed, audio, spoken word live, and I'm sure recorded as well, what's your approach to that? How would you prefer to receive things, and what's your process there?
Yeah, I think it depends on whoever's on the receiving side of that. So, like, for me, I love getting feeds as is, unprocessed, so that I can do what I need to do and make decisions based on, I'm not fighting an EQ that's been put in place prior. But again, like, that's dependent on who's on the receiving side. And sometimes you can't do that and you can't trust that. And I think, that decision gets made on, okay, what is going to be the best product for the receiving end of that? And does it need to be processed? Does it need to be pre-fade? Does it need to be post-fade? And I think, at Elevation, they've got a really good balance of like knowing their engineers and training, being able to train those guys, and knowing, okay, we can send a little bit of EQ and post fade and get a really great result on the end. And then I've been at events where we get everything pre-fade, flat, it's on us to do levels and compression and EQ, and that works. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it fails, and it's you just have to rebound from that. But this is a really, the way they do it, I think, is a really like fail-safe way of not having that mic get left on by accident at some of the campuses, and just ensuring a really great experience for everybody, from the broadcast location to the satellite location. So that's kind of how I approach that.
Yeah.
Very cool. So the next question is from Asher Dawson. So, hey, Asher. Normally seen him quite a few times normally by this point in the year, but sorry we haven't seen each other, my friend. So he says, how do you guys recommend updating teams with additional features when they become available? And how do you introduce them into your volunteer show files? An example of something recent would be awesome. Is that something kind of like just a natural progression you let happen? Or I imagine if it's a workflow change, you kind of have to bring the team in and do some training. Justin, you want to start us off with that?
Yeah. So right now it's, a really good time for this. So, to go back to saying that, we have spent a lot of time dialing in a good show file. So we've updated some of that. And with that comes, updating certain consoles, because we know that, some updates can take some time and some can't. And so it's up to our tech team centrally to, let people know when we've tested that, because we don't want to push an update to any piece of gear if we haven't tested it first centrally. And so that's kind of our process is we test it centrally for, and we let it breathe for a little bit. We don't just update things right away, especially computers. That's another thing that we don't update right away, but we do that.
You don't have automatic updates turned on to all your computers?
Absolutely not. No, sir. And so so we do update, and we let people know like if there's a major update that needs to happen at their campus. And so kind of the process that happens there is we'll go in, we'll update it, and I actually invite the sound engineer in or what we're starting to do is invite the sound engineer in for virtual sound check, just to make sure that we can play tracks back through, that nothing has changed on their show file, and that they feel comfortable with anything that may have changed, or if we had to change a macro or anything like that. So it's really up to the tech team to send that show file out, and they can upload it. They can install that themselves. But we like to be on hand, because if something does go wrong, then we're going to get the phone call on a Sunday morning. So.
Cool. Cory, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think the same applies for us on the road. Pat Shear, who is a contract monitor engineer at the church, also tours with us, and he's been my monitor engineer since I started with Elevation. And I think even on the road with new features or new plugins or new pieces of gear that come out, we kind of tread lightly with that, because we don't want to try something new and have it fail or not understand what it is fully. So, we utilize rehearsals and tour rehearsals and that kind of stuff to kind of put some new things in the field and see if it's awesome, see if we like it, if we don't like it. And then we kind of slowly bring that into our files as the tour progresses or as we build a tour. I think our file that we use for one-offs or conferences looks quite different from a tour file. I think we're way more experimental when we're on tour and when we can be consistent. And then our one-off files are very like cutthroat. It works. We can make it sound great, and we don't have to. And some of the stuff that we try on tour will end up in the one-off files, but we spend a lot of time there playing with the new toys and new features of things.
Very cool. Well, Dan McLaughlin, I just added a question, and hi, Dan. It's good to see you as well. And it's actually the perfect segue for where I wanted to go next, and I think both of you will have plenty to say about this. But Dan asked, what do you prefer to use what do you prefer to use on the console, and what do you prefer to have as a plugin or outboard? Cory, you want to start us off with this one, and then we could spend the next hour or 2 or 3 talking about plugins? Yeah. Sound good, everybody?
I think that kind of changes often for me. I do utilize a lot of plugins. I haven't really historically ever used outboard gear, like analog gear. I'd love to, but for us, something that's repeatable is really important. We're doing, equally as many one-off fly dates as we are tour dates. So, being able to maintain something consistent between the two is really important. I think over the last couple of years, when I first got on consoles and used plugins, I went, full plugin land and loaded that sucker up. And,
how many slots are open? Yeah. How many racks do you have? Can we fill them all up? Yep.
Yeah. And I think as I've matured and grown as an engineer, that has kind of swung back the other direction quite a bit, actually. And, I utilize plugins often and I have them on things, but, I've went from my kick drum having 7 plugins to just like an SSL channel strip or, my vocal chain is quite elaborate and I rely on that heavily for dynamics and de-essing and stuff. But there's quite a lot that I use on the console, and, almost all of my EQs done on the console, high pass, low pass filters. I use the gates on the console. We sidechain triggers like from the toms, so we utilize those gates. And then reverbs and effects, I think I've gone back and forth on. I went all, waves for reverbs and delays, and I've actually swung that back. And I've found some really great verbs on the console that I love, that I use on drums or vocal. And I always have a backup set of verbs on the console for if waves were to ever fail, I can switch over to those and still have a reverb on my vocal or a reverb on the drum kit. But then being able to utilize like delays on the console and having a tap tempo feature right there is really important. And again, like when we go off script, it's a roll of the dice. So, being able to quickly tap a tempo in and have all of my effects follow that has become really important to me. And I think I got excited about plugins and then didn't care about the console. And now I'm like, hey, the console sounds pretty good. So, we go back and I go back and forth on, that balance. And again, like something repeatable is really important. So, I found stuff on the console that just is great and I'm happy with it. And there's no reason to change it. So.
Awesome. Before I jump over to Justin, Cory, you were telling me before we got on that you should have been wrapping up a run with one of the new Quantum 338s. Was that the case?
Yeah, we were doing our Elevation Nights tour. It was actually supposed to be, I think, the last 2 weeks. And my vendor in Nashville, Spectrum Sound, who I use and have loved for years, they got a handful of the 338s and they were going to send that out on this tour. And I was really excited, but unfortunately I still haven't got my hands on one.
Cool. Well, we'll bring you back another time and ask about mustard processing and what you think about that another time for there. So Justin, passing off to you, plugins. What's your story? What's your philosophy? Do you have them at every campus with every console and with everything? What's your workflow?
No plugins. But that's just me. I actually fought it for a long time at Valentine when I was doing monitors a lot. The band would go out on tour and they'd have some waves because we were still back and forth on some of it. Sometimes they were using it, sometimes they weren't. And Pat had told me a couple of stories, so we had kind of decided not to use it. And it was only in broadcast and then at front of house. And so I fought it for a long time. And the first weekend that I mixed Valentine, which was about a year and a half ago, maybe, I mixed with them, and I was like, okay, I get it. It was like preset for me pretty much from the weekend before, so I just kind of went with it. It was a new thing for me with sending everything out, but yeah, we don't use plugins at any of our other locations. We actually we have a couple of consoles that have Waves cards in them, but that's really for virtual sound check at some permanent facilities, just so we can, because at our permanent facilities the console stays set up every week, so we're able to get sound engineers or volunteers in there just to do some training.
Sure.
And so that's what we really use the Waves cards for on those. But yeah, for us it's because we're already using the MADI port for all the video stuff. So for us, it's like, they don't have a lot of time as it is. And, that would be expensive to try and replicate, 20 servers at 20 locations, maintain them, update them, make sure that people are using the same versions of plugins, or whether it's 9, 10, 11, like who has Super Rack, who has, whatever. So like for us, it's, let's just keep it what it can be. And like I said, I love the way the console sounds. So for me, I try and use as much as I can on the console. And actually, to go with what Cory said, like I used a lot at first when I was at Valentine, but now I've kind of taken my show file and tried to say, like what is actually necessary. Don't just go full force into it, and, figure out like there's really great things about the console, and like, let's use them and not try and over process things. So,
yeah. Well, thanks. Kyle, I'm going to put you on the spot here, actually, because I remember what Cory was just talking about, where when he had effects done in Waves, he had backups on the console. That's you did a similar thing to that when you were on the road as well, didn't you, Kyle?
Yeah, I always would, last thing of rehearsal before we'd go on the road is I'd spend some time with just virtual sound check, and then I would always be patching effects to internal console and Waves. Usually I'd be listening back for the Waves, but if Waves does go down in the middle of a show, you want to be able to hit a button and revert everything down. So it would turn off all the inserts, repatch, turn off parallel compression where timing might get slightly off, but it takes maybe about 10 minutes to build the macro. But when there was one show in Dallas where we were mixing, and it's a bass trap, and all of a sudden I had two servers, and my primary server had a loose RJ45 connection. So anytime the bass would hit really big, audio would drop out for a split second. So to be able to hit that,
that doesn't
macro,
happen regularly, though,
yeah,
does it?
to be able to hit that macro where everything is bypassed, and you can just run to internal. And again, you want to be able to listen to it. And so when you hit that button, it's not like, hey, this major thing changed, and then get through the rest of the show and investigate it later. So
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot there, Kyle. Really quick, Tony, let's see here. He asked, the drum sound has become so unique in worship music today, especially with big snare sounds. How much of that is the source, and how much of that is the console and plug-in processing? Cory, you raised your hand, and you looked very excited to answer this one. So, jump in there and tell us what the process is like, both, what you're asking, how you're communicating with the drummer to get that, or you just dealing with what you're getting, and then, of course, what you're doing on your end.
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite questions to answer just in general, because I think a lot of people...
Drummer?
I'm a drummer, and I think a lot of people think that there's some like magic plugin that does this. And
I thought, isn't that called Torque?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay.
But I think I've never like used a plugin to create that sound, because when I do, it doesn't sound right to me. And so all of that is 100% the drummer and the snare drum and the tuning and how he hits it. And I work very, very closely with any drummer that I mix. Drums are the foundation of a mix, in my opinion. And so, everything else can be sounding great, and if the drums don't sit right, the mix was a bust in my head. So I spend a lot of time with them, and spend a lot of time on mic placement and drum head choice. And, that iconic snare sound is something that I think every worship team ever is trying to get. And, we use a Black Beauty snare which is, I think, really important to start with. And the drum actually gets tuned way higher than you think, to get the big, deep snare sound. And I think a lot of places that I see that are trying to do that drop the snare head to where it's just barely tight. And then it's like, well, why isn't it translating through the PA? And, it's because it sounds like a big paper bag. So, tuning is really important. And, we don't do anything. We use a 57 on the top, and I actually go between like a KSM 137 or a 414 if I'm feeling adventurous on the snare bottom. And, the condenser mic underneath is really important to the way that I get that to sound, because it has the air in the top end that I really need. And I can get all of the punch and the low mid out of the top mic. So, on my console, I'm not doing anything other than some EQ and maybe a dB or two of compression. And, so that I'm not doing anything to create that sound. Like that all starts at the drum kit. And, I'll use torque if I'm in a really sticky situation and I don't have low end in the snare, but I try not to, because again, that changes the phase relationship of the drum and to the snare bottom mic. And, to me, you lose some of that oomph sometimes when you torque it down and try and get the low thing. So, and sometimes I use torque as an effect on the snare more than I do as like the foundational snare sound. So, we have a song in the verse, it's this big splatty snare drum sound, so I'll turn that on just for that one verse and then turn it off for the rest of the show. So, working with the drummer is really important to me, and, having a relationship and being able to communicate with them, that's where your drum sound comes from. It's not anything on the console. So, we've kind of, that's a long road of conversations and experimenting and switching microphones out and putting the old microphones back. And, and at the end of the day, a SM57 still the best snare mic I've ever used.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Justin, do you have anything to add to that? Is it a similar process for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I tell all of our sound engineers here is like, just go listen to what the kit sounds like, because that's, if you're not starting there and you're trying to recreate something, it may not be there to recreate. So it's just, and I even tell our sound engineers, like, if it's a campus that's like permanent setup, the first thing I do is I walk in and I look at mic placement. I'll hit the drums a couple of times, snare, tom, and kick, and then I'll just be like, okay, where's the placement of the mics? Because if my placement's not good, then I'm not gonna be able to get what I want. But so I'm definitely with Cory on that one of like, start at the source and get that dialed in, and then you don't have to do as much on the console. But some is different, but we use SM57 on top snare. We even use it on the bottom snare, but I've even done what Cory was talking about of, KSM 137 on the bottom. So we're into experimenting with microphones when it comes to our drums. But the Elevation has kind of made that their thing, big snare sound, big drum sound. That's just what we're going for.
Very cool. We've actually gotten a couple of good questions, so I'm going to jump off to those real quick. Both of you, I think, will be able to chime in on this one. Mason Wingo says, I've never done a broadcast mix before, but we start services again this Sunday and really want to know the best way to do that. I know it's not terribly hard. I just want to make sure I'm doing it correctly. So do you have any recommendations for, Mason, I know, can actually mix a front of house situation without a problem, but do you have any recommendations for those that are used to doing front of house mixes but are moving into the broadcast realm? Are there any things you guys would say that differ or things they should focus on?
I was going to say, I might have to let Cory take that one. I haven't done too much on the broadcast mix side of things. Okay. I mean, I know that we use plugins for that, but I know that not everybody has those, has those at their disposal. But for us, it's really like the big thing that we've noticed is, getting that level right. So if you do use plugins, L2 is your friend, because it'll get you enough sound. It gets it loud enough in the broadcast mix without, the dynamics of like, here's where band is, but then your pastor is down here. It kind of levels that stuff out for you. So, I mean, there's obviously things on the console that can do that too. But that's, I'll let Cory take some of the broadcast side of that probably.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of successful situations with a broadcast console and an engineer in a separate room. I've also seen almost equally as many successful broadcast mixes that just come off of the front of house console. There's a church that I work with a lot, and they take their left-right mix and they add in crowd mics and send that off. They make them comp that a little bit, but it's the front of house mix is great. So therefore the broadcast mix is great. And you just add in that room, the feel and hearing the crowd response. And that'll get you into a really good spot. But again, that's dependent on a really great front of house mix. And so I think it's, there's experimenting. I'm not a fan of like post fading things to an aux and doing it that way. I think you can very blindly get yourself into trouble if you turn something up one week and didn't remember that. And now that channel the next week is just blaring loud in the broadcast mix. And it gives you a really good sense of like when you have the front of house mix and that's being sent out and you have the crowd mics in, those match. And so those sonically sound similar and they kind of gel together really well. And I think a lot of the, processing on broadcast is done on the master bus to really glue that all together. I don't necessarily approach broadcast mixing much different than I would mixing front of house, but I do quite a bit more on the master bus just to get levels and close the dynamic range a little bit. And, I think it's really important to know what your target, loudness is, because you don't want something automatic on the back end, compressing the life out of your mix. I like to do that myself and make sure that is, like
you like
what
to
I'm hearing
the life. Of the
so
mix
I compress the life out of it.
Okay.
So, but again, like if you're not doing that and not paying attention to that stuff in Facebook or whatever the streaming services is just like hard brick wall limiting your mix. It doesn't really, matter what you're doing at the end of the day. And so it's important to know that and listen to that. And I've come into mixed broadcast at Elevation a couple times, and they have a great sounding room, and there's SD5 in there and plugins, and it's awesome. But the truest way to monitor that is to just listen on your iPhone, to the stream and to know, okay, that's what everyone's listening to. If that translates well, then we're in a good spot.
Yep. Well, cool. I actually missed one of Dustin's questions earlier, but I think it would actually feed in really well here. Dustin Muncie asked, are either of you sending groups directly to the matrix for separate outputs, or do you all groups go to a master bus?
I can start. For me, all of my groups go to a master bus, and because I'm wanting, I know a lot of people will send the band to the master bus and the vocals go straight to the matrix. I like to monitor kind of everything, and when I'm compressing the mix, I want to include the vocals in there. My vocals, I compress quite a bit already, so they're not sending the compression in too quick, too early on the master bus. So, the way that I approach all of that, the master bus really is like the final glue for everything. And I want the vocals included in that glue.
Very cool. Justin, similar approach for you?
Yeah, everything goes to the master for me. And then we use, especially at all of our other locations where, there's a lot that we're using with the matrices there, which we, just in our master left, right to, we'll do a house left and right matrix, we'll do subs, front fills. We have a record left and right so that we can, crush it if we need to, because game capture or whatever you're recording to, that may just need to be for a playback just to see how the experience went. It's nothing that we're posting online, but we still want it to, sound good enough to where we can, like, it's intelligible. So some of that is, obviously we're going master, and then master is just going to whatever we need to send it to on the matrix.
Cool. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I want to wrap up with a kind of a fun question, just asking about macros. Cory, you obviously alluded to earlier that you use macros a lot, just in kind of your mixing, let's say, when it's not a snapshot or something, an element that you want flexibility from. Do you use macros for anything else, and what are those?
Yeah, I do. One of the other fun ones, we recently switched all of our guitar players to Kempers for lots of reasons, but one of the big ones is that we just wanted, big drums and big guitars are really foundational to like elevation sound. And so we wanted to bring that, we went through the backline amps and the rental amps, and that one breaks and that one doesn't sound right. And the mic got bumped and we were all kind of tired of that. So we switched all the Kempers and, we sat and got them sounding great through the PA. And, but with that, each guy has 2 Kempers. So, and we're actually using the same model on all 4 of the Kempers, which is not normal necessarily for a stereo guitar. You want to differ one side or the other, but for us, it just sounded the best. We don't really have like a lead guitar player and a rhythm guitar player. The 2 guys play and one guy does parts and the other guy also does parts. And so what we're trying to create is one really big guitar sound. And so we ended up on all of the same Kemper profiles. But one of the things that I really love to do is I add some delay to the offside of each guitar player. So if someone's stage right on the right side of their channel, I add some delay just to widen their guitar a little bit. And then same, vice versa on the other side. But whenever they play a lead line or a solo, I want to mono that in a way and get rid of that delay. So I have a macro that I can push that basically takes, if electric 1 is stage right, it takes their fader from 0 and -5 up to unity on both and takes the delay off so that at the push of a button, now that guitar is really present and forward. And then I have the same thing for the other guitar player. So it's a really quick way to like go from this really, really wide guitar sound to a stereo, but more so mono,
more focused.
Feeling focused. Yeah. So
it's great.
I use that a lot, along with all the vocal macros. And then the save macro is my favorite one.
Do you have any idea how many macros you use?
The vocal
will depend on how many vocals.
Quite a lot. Yeah, because the vocals take up 2 per vocalist, 2 per guitar player. So, I end up somewhere in the 25 range once I have save and different views that I can bring up and tap tempos and on all of that kind of stuff.
Nice.
And we also do, I do my talkback mics actually through macros. So I send 2 different talkback lines down to the monitor engineer. So I have a band talkback and a tech talkback. And I use macros to turn those channels on and off, so I can choose who I'm talking to. So I know there's a talkback feature, but I like seeing the colors and
every time I do a training, I'm always like, here's a talkback channel. You probably won't use it, but somebody worked really hard to put all the features you're going to need into it. So no worries. Justin, anything you want to add to that? I saw you nodding a lot while Cory was going through those macros. Do you have some similar ones that you use?
Yeah, I mean, those are really great. I should start using that at Valentine. But, typically I'm on an SD9 at all the other locations. So, you have just 8 physical macros, and we're trying to make it as minimal setup as possible. So we don't have an overview screen. So one of the things I've created for sound engineers is the switch layer button on and off, just to get that from hovering over something that you might need. And then we actually use 2 buttons next to each other that is to switch the layer left and right. So we can just turn that off. So my F1 key on the keyboard is actually what I use for turning that, hovering layer button off. And then we just use, 4 and 5 is switch layer left and switch layer right. And so those are a couple that we use. Another one that I just started using, because I noticed it was an issue at some of our non-permanent locations, is we don't have something at front of house that can, switch from playlist if we're trying to send playlists to the lobby or whatever. So if we're sending, so at our non-permanent locations, I actually use a macro that switches my matrix of my house from house to front of house iPod. And it's, you can't do anything with, I actually talked to Kyle about it this last week, because I wanted to see if there was a way to, make it a better transition than just on and off. But obviously I can't do that. So but yeah, so it's just switching between the iPod. So if there's something going on in the auditorium, they can have, if we're doing like a run through, then in the lobby, we can have playlists going so that, it's better for volunteers, or if there's guests waiting, they're not having to hear run through happening in the auditorium. So.
Yeah, well, very cool, guys. Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing that with us. It's been a pleasure today to get to ask you questions and hear your thoughts and your approaches to these things. Real quick, we have a couple of announcements to wrap up. I know Dan's gone sub, but before Dan starts, I'm not going to sing it, but I am going to say a very special happy birthday to Yap. He is a friend to us all. Kyle, I think you got he's the Teletubby one on the right over there. But Yap, you are a good friend, and it's always a pleasure working with you. I miss seeing you. I'm sure we'll see each other soon. Take care. Happy birthday, my friend. And then Dan, do you have some announcements for this weekend?
I do, yes. So tomorrow, locked up with DiGiCo, is Andreas. He is a broadcast mixer for Berlin late night TV show. And he runs us through his SD12, how he sets it up, Waves sound grid. There's a great slot he's doing tomorrow night for us. And then next week, there's probably two. Thursday night, Double Trouble, Fernando and Tom. DiGiCo Solutions, I know, they are a pair. DiGiCo Solutions, so red box, blue box, purple box, orange box, what they are, how you use them, how they can benefit your systems. So that's one to watch. And then we're trying to squeeze in, it should have happened last week, but we postponed it, a theatre special with Nevin Steinberg, sound designer for Hamilton, and some of his colleagues. So maybe Wednesday night that'll be on. So plenty still going on, but don't forget, tonight, there's been some questions here about broadcast mixing. Mason might want to catch it. The late night Berlin TV show broadcast mixing. So yeah. Keep watching.
Fantastic. And actually, we are not going to be here next week. So we will be taking a break from the Ask Us Anything for next week. So you can go back and watch some of our very exciting episodes from just a couple of weeks ago. Not that we have a vast back catalog for you to look at. But anyway, we will be taking a break. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks. Dan from the UK, thank you so much for joining us. Kyle, thank you for pushing all the buttons. Guys. Justin and Cory, thank you so much for your expertise and for sharing your wisdom with everybody. Justin, where can people reach out to you? Where can they see Elevation? I meant to get you that earlier.
Oh, yeah. You can go to elevationchurch.online, and that'll actually redirect you to YouTube. But YouTube also has, we have Elevation Church, Elevation Worship, and Stephen Furtick is on there as well. And you can broadcast that at 9:30, 11:30, 2, 5, 8, and 10 on Sundays. And those are all Eastern Standard Time. So
very cool. Well, once again, gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Cory's mom, thank you for streaming and watching this. And my mom, too. Hi, Mom. It's good to see you. We'll catch you guys soon. But thank you for joining us. And thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay.